Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our event tonight with Katharine McGee. She is the New York Times bestselling author of the American Royal series and the Thousandth Floor trilogy. She studied English and French literature at Princeton University and has an MBA from Stanford. She lives in her hometown of Houston, Texas, with her husband and son. You can visit her online at katharinemcgee.com and follow her on social media at Katharine McGee. So, Katharine, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so excited to have you here to talk about the Royals. We usually start off with just, tell us a little bit about the series and, what your inspiration was for it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. And I'm so excited to be doing this virtual event. It's really fun to get to do these for, I did get to go on tour last week, but it's so fun to do these for all the readers who are not in the very few cities that I visited. So I'm really excited to be here and to share this with everyone. I feel like if you're here, you're probably familiar with the American Royal series, but in case you're not, the American Royal series takes place in an alternate version of the modern world where America is like England and has a royal family. So it sort of examines the what if instead of being our first president, George Washington had actually become our first king. And you fast forward to the modern day and we have a royal family. His descendants are our reigning family, the Washingtons. And the books follow the younger generation of royals, the two princesses and prince of America, who are all in their, all ages 19 to 22. And it follows all of the drama and adventure and romance that they encounter as young people who also just happen to be, teenagers who are going to inherit a throne someday. So the book that recently came out is Rivals, American Royals Book 3, which just came out last Tuesday. And Rivals is the first book was American Royals, the second book was Majesty, and then by the time you're at Rivals, I know there they are being perfectly showcased. Book 3 is so much fun to me. I feel like by the time that you're here, the readers are familiar with the concept in the world. And so there's not so much required of me as far as background and character building. I get to only use flashbacks insofar as they inform the story that is unfolding in that current book. And so I really have the space to kind of play with the characters and their dynamics in a way that I did not have in the first two books. So book 3 is so much fun in so many ways. The stakes are higher, the drama gets up to an even higher ante. The world gets bigger. You meet foreign royals and everybody's stories really feel more impactful than they have in the first two books. The characters are starting to grow up. They're facing real adult challenges in some ways. And then of course they're still making mistakes because they are still young people. And so they're having to kind of balance, their own character flaws with the demands that come with their position.
Brilliant. So let's, for our first question, because we are a Philly area store, throw it back to the first book for a second, and I want to talk Wawa. Because obviously, as a Philly girl, it's a Philly thing originally, but you kind of give it an alternate history of having it be, Wawa, Washington, Nina and Jefferson, go to Wawa, and it's very exciting. So where did you first learn about Wawa, being from Texas, and what made it that you wanted to include it in the book?
It's so fun that the Wawa has encountered, that so many readers have gotten very excited about the Wawa shout outs in the books. I should also say that I lived in Philly for a year, which was a very brief year. My husband was in school in Philly the very first year that we were married. So I lived there from 2016 to spring 2017. And it was so much fun. I loved it. I moved there. I had been in New York previously, so it was a very easy transition in the sense that, it feels in so many ways like a cleaner New York, smaller, more manageable New York. My best memories are honestly of the food. You guys have great food. I everywhere I ate was delicious. And so we loved it there, and I have very fond memories of it. But we did have a Wawa across the street from our apartment, but I first encountered Wawa in college. I went to Princeton and there was a Wawa on campus. And it was it's funny now because they have redone it and I've gone back for alumni reunions, and it feels a little bit like a betrayal to walk into this like big, beautiful, clean Wawa that does not resemble at all the small, cramped Wawa that I remember, where you would go. It was open 24 hours, and you could go late night and get, even though Nina's order is a milkshake, I'm very embarrassed to it. My go-to order was always mac and cheese. Wawa makes incredible mac and cheese. I'm sure it comes from a box, but I mean, it was delicious. And I would get always just the small cup of it. And so that I didn't feel like I could make Nina eat. It's not quite as romantic to pass mac and cheese back and forth. Although I will say, my husband and I, one of our probably not the very first food we ever ate together, but I think we'd had one or two dates before we went back to Princeton together. He also went to Princeton, and we did actually sit on a bench and eat a cup of Wawa mac and cheese. So it can be done. It did end up being romantic for us. But I have very fond memories of the Wawa. And yeah, there was always a long line. That was part of the tax of going there, was you had to wait in a long line. And now it's there's touch screens, and it shows you how many calories your food has. And we don't want any of that.
No one wants to know that. No,
no. Give me the old cramped long line Wawa any day.
Agreed. My husband and I spent many nights in Pittsburgh. We met at Pitt, lamenting that we had only Sheetz and not Wawa to go to, and how much we suffered for that.
Yeah, I do miss it.
Yeah. So who knows? Maybe Wawa will come to Texas at some point.
That honestly, someone who's watching should look into this franchise opportunity. There's a market here.
Seriously. They're down to Florida now, so we're getting
happening
over the world.
I love that. But yeah, there's so many things that it's a funny line that I walk in, what exists from the real world and American Royals world, and it always ends up being the things that I just can't let my characters live without. So Wawa being one, or another is Jane Austen. I remember in the first draft of anything that's pre-1776, obviously my editors will let me have, but anything afterwards they push back. So I referenced Jane Austen, and they queried, are we sure Jane Austen would exist in this alternate universe? And my reply was just, I don't want to write a world without Jane Austen. That's not a world I'm interested in ever presenting to my readers. So we're just going to go with Jane Austen happened to also write her same novels in this world because I love them too much.
Well, that's brilliant, because that leads into one of my other questions, which is, I love the revisionist history that obviously you had to do, in taking away our presidents and giving us a royal family. So how much planning did you put into, what the whole timeline would look like, and how did you balance having that fit into the story?
That is such a smart question. And more than one very intelligent reader has asked me, how does this royal family exist? Because George Washington didn't have any children of his own. So I actually follow the real life timeline about a generation. I do have an alternate history timeline of all the kings, just to keep it consistent. I mentioned the past kings in various points in time. So I want to make sure that every time I do, I have the years of their reign and the major events of their reign all tracked. I do have it, that George Washington's succession goes through his younger brother Samuel and Samuel's oldest son, and then continues on from there. And then it becomes fictional as the characters intermarry with various other royal families. You may have noticed in the third book, I reference Queen Victoria sending all of her sons one after the other to propose to an American princess named Princess Frances. I just couldn't resist that. So again, I do have, that's another thing. I couldn't live without Queen Victoria. She kind of has to be there. She's just too much of an icon for me to let go of in my fictional history. But yes, I had a lot of fun coming up with that, and it has been a very interesting line to walk as far as the alternate history goes. I really want to honor the history that we did have, but then also preserve sort of the fun of the whole royal conceit is obviously the sheer royalness and monarchy of it, and that you want all the trappings. You want the thrones and the golden carriages and the ermine trimmed robes and everything. So I've had to kind of find ways to sort of work that into the actual American history, and then, like I said, try to honor some of the events that we really did have. So it's I frequently get pulled back in the history. My editor will, these books, they are young adult, so for the most part, I can't ramble on and on for 500 pages about the alternate history, but I will occasionally have moments where I go on these tangents and I explain, like, and then in Russia there was going to be a revolution, but this American princess married the czar, and she brought all these revolutionary democratic ideas. And basically, if you ever watched the Romanovs on, I think it was on Netflix or HBO, that like all the things that the Romanovs did wrong in real life, they don't do wrong in my alternate history. So they sort of reform and become like a constitutional monarchy. That like 2-page, that all gets cut. So I have a long trash bin document of all my like various royal tangents I've gone on through the years.
Well, that's perfect, because my next question is going along with, the chapters and the novellas and stuff that you've released. Would you ever think about doing an alt history companion of some sort, so that the history nerds like me can get to?
That would be so fun. I don't know. I love that idea. I think that there's a lot of appetite for other content before that, but I would love that. Most of the requests that I get are for like deleted scenes or extra content from either Connor or Jeff's point of view. So I feel like if I was to continue with more, bonus content or novellas, I might have to do that, just because the readers are so curious about what the men think. That said, like, I think it's, do you really want to know what the men think? I think sometimes it's more fun in a romance to keep a little bit of mystery there.
Yeah. Well, that was one of my follow-up questions, was if we were going to get any of the boys' point of view. So I'm actually glad, because I think a lot of, just having some mystery about what people think, it's more, I don't know, true to like when you're really a teenager and a college student going like, oh my God, like, what is he really thinking? Like, I don't know. So I like that, you focus on the 4 women.
Yes. I always say these books are not like traditional romance, in the sense that if you read a lot of romance, which I do, a romance novel is a totally different animal than my books. A romance novel is set up with either a single point of view or the dual, like Emily Henry style. Each of them is narrating, and they, from the beginning that the characters are going to get together, and the joy, there's no mystery. The fun comes from knowing that you have a happy ending guaranteed, and kind of watching the characters go through the obstacles. Whereas in my books, like, the happy ending is not guaranteed. The romantic pairings may change. I think of it much more as a drama or a soap opera than I do a traditional romance. And so because of that, I think, in a romance, like I said, if you're seeing the dual POV, it's okay, because the characters are going to end up together. But in my books, like, the fun of a love triangle is completely flattened when like, you can only hear from 2 sides of the love triangle. And once you hear from the apex of the love triangle, where's the mystery? So I think the fun of the tension of the love triangle comes from like hearing from the 2 different women and not knowing what Prince Jefferson is thinking. So the second that like, the whole thing deflates. So it would be fine for bonus content, but for the actual books, like, I can't put that there, because what drives the story forward is you as the reader trying to guess what he's going to do alongside the 2 women, I think. So yeah, it's like, they are very, very romantic stories, but they aren't pure romances. I would call them more like coming of age stories and dramas, I think.
And they almost read too. I realized as I was reading with my sister, I was like, they almost read more like thrillers, like the suspense of like,
I love that.
Almost like, okay, no, like what happens? Like we're done with one person's POV and I'm like, but no, like, okay, you can get through. Oh, here's another thing that happened. And it's like, I really feel like there's definitely like that element of suspense, but not in a, anything terrible is really going to happen, but just
Right.
I want to know what's going to happen, like what's going on, And so that was the vibe that I got from them as well, which
I
was,
love that. Yeah, they're definitely not suspense novels in the sense that they're not like people aren't being killed off one by one, but I hope there is a lot of dramatic suspense. That said, my editor has always asked me, she's like, "Are you sure you don't want to include murder in this book?" I'm like, no murder this time around.
I mean, you do have like the big accident that plays out in the first one. Well, you get
There
the flashback.
are deaths, but
Yeah,
so far there's no murder.
yeah, but tension of like a what's the deal here?
Yes.
Which I really liked. But speaking of all the point of views, I love your charts that you post of bringing all of them together. I am a chart person. I am a former middle school teacher. So give me a good chart and I am very excited. So how did you always do it that way, plotting everyone out? And just, what's your overall process look like for pulling all the POVs
I
together?
always have. This is kind of the only way that I know how to do a book like this with what I call multi POV book with multiple narrators is that I have to plan out all the stories. I so admire authors who can just totally pants it and blank page. I think like for a single POV novel, that's much more feasible than what I'm doing. It's possible I could try to do it, but I think that for me, like so much of the satisfaction of my books comes from the plot and the way that all of the different characters are intertwined, and so I just have to plan it ahead. So I'm looking at my whiteboard right now. I can't share it because it's American Royals book 4 is up there, but it is I start with like the very loose idea of what each person is going to be doing. So, Nina's going to be scheming with Daphne and falling back in love with Jeff, like just a one-liner. And then I just get that increasingly granular. So then I take that to like the 7 major story beats, I would say. And then I take that to like the chapter by chapter. And then that's when I really kind of get it. I mean, I get it on the whiteboard and I try to look for ways to keep all the stories as tightly woven together as possible. So it can be hard with certain of them. Beatrice and Nina rarely intersect. So I have to kind of force them to occasionally. And same with Beatrice and Daphne, but like Nina and Daphne obviously intersect constantly. Sam and Nina, Sam and Beatrice. So, and then I try to find big events where I can bring all of my characters together. I have always loved multi POV books. I think like when I was growing up, I used to read, I love a big fat historical fiction book that's got a cast of characters at the front. Like give me a Wolf Hall or something any day. I know when you give me a cast of characters, like a George R. R. Martin book, I get all excited because I know that the world is going to feel very big and epic and that this book may take a while to get into. Like you may need 250 pages to even understand what's going on, but you will reap the benefits so much if you can, keep the characters straight and like really make sense of the ways that they're all twined together. I just find that so fascinating. I loved the Pretty Little Liars books as a reader, just kind of any multi POV saga. And so I have always wanted to write stories like this. Obviously, this is nowhere near as broad in scope as a Game of Thrones novel, but I do think that it's similarly set up in the sense that, like I said, the fun comes from the characters bumping up against each other. So, they're not in isolation. They're not on 4 separate storylines. Like they're all constantly coming into conflict with each other or helping each other out. And that's where the book gets interesting. So that's when I really get out on the whiteboard and I'm like drawing arrows on it and thinking, okay, how can I try to, as I said, have at least once or twice a book where all 4 characters are at the same event. So even if they're not actively driving each other's stories forward, like they see each other, they think about each other, it's just fun as the reader.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that I really love about your books as a bookseller is that your characters are on the older side of YA but the writing and the content is still very much accessible for high school readers. And a lot of times we find that when the characters get older, we don't so much want to give them to the ninth graders because there's other things involved in the books. So out of curiosity, was that a conscious decision on your part to age the characters but keep it accessible for most teens? And B, how do you balance being true to the experiences of the age of your characters?
I'm not sure if I'm totally true to the experiences of the age of my characters. I worry that I write them a little too mature and a little too old, but they are inheriting. They grow up faster than we do. They're royals. They face all kinds of pressures. I love that you think that they are accessible to all ages. I personally, I do love reading YA, but I think that YA can be hard to sell to adults sometimes, and particularly there are YAs that feel very, very young. When you read a YA and the character is like nervous about holding hands, that can sometimes, as like a 30-plus-year-old woman, be like that feels like someone in a different stage of life. But so I try to have my characters feel mature enough that adults can relate to them. But as you point out, the books are very clean. I try to have no cursing in the books. I tried, there's the romantic experiences are all very off-screen and somewhat ambiguous, the way that a good CW show used to be in the old days. Remember, like they were kissing, they were maybe falling back onto a couch or a bed, and then the scene cut off, and like you don't know what happened after the camera stopped. So
very 2000s Gilmore Girls.
Exactly. That's totally the vibe I'm going for. So, I don't want parents to feel nervous about their children reading them. And so, as I said, I think it is just a fine line. I actually have I've been amused by the number of times I've mentioned this to adult readers, and they go, no, there's cursing in your books all the time. Like they say this word and that word. And I was like, they really actually don't. They really you just think they do because they're mature and they're in these situations, but they don't use any language. So I have been very pleasantly surprised, especially this last week on book tour, by the number of mother-daughter pairs that have come up to me. And so it was a surprising number, like at least 10, and that said that they had read the books together or were reading the books together, and that they could find almost no books that they could agree upon. And so this was sort of the one thing in the center of their Venn diagrams. And so they were buddy reading them, and it would be moms with, a 14-year-old daughter and a mom who was in her 40s or 50s. And I loved that because I felt like it is really hard. I did read stuff alongside my mom, probably in high school at a younger age than I should. I read a lot of like adult historical fiction, like Carleen Cohen, Through a Glass Darkly type of stuff. But like that was mature content, and I'm not sure every mom wants especially their young high schooler, to be reading that. And so I'm really touched that there are so many I guess multi-generational pairs that feel like that they can both enjoy the story in their own way. So that has been really fun for me to see. I keep toying with the idea. I feel like I should launch some kind of mother-daughter book club or something. I don't know, with maybe my mom, but we'll
That would be
figure
so
it out.
cool.
I know.
I say I've been trying to, with the pandemic, my mom has been reading a lot more than just, she used to read, we said Law and Order in book form was everything that she read. And now she's really expanded, and she'll read anything. And so she's like, you should read this book, it's amazing. And my sister will be like, you should read this book, it's amazing. And I was like, I'm the bookseller. I'm the one usually saying,
right. How am I not giving the recommendations?
So I'm like, okay, I'll definitely, I'll take a look. And my sister was in Britain for a while, so she would bring back stuff, and she'd be like, I bet you don't have this in your store. And I'd be like, no, I don't. Give it here.
I love that.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about Beatrice and get into a little bit of allusions to Sam's story.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously Beatrice, future queen in the first book, becomes queen. The idea of doing her duty to her country, is something that's been instilled in her for a really long time. And just obviously as the future queen, that's really important. But I think you really approach it in a very understandable way where like you feel special and attached without, being hyper everything for my country. And so I was just curious if there was any personal importance to you in representing that, or just, how you went about approaching Beatrice's role specifically as a future queen.
Beatrice is an oldest child, and I think one of the reasons that people love monarchies and that we have come back to these stories about royal families time and time again, whether it's the Tudors or the Queen Victoria or the modern British royal family, is that they are families. And you're basically seeing classic family drama stories of, sibling tension and parent-child relations and, the family member that's on the outs with everyone else. And you see it all play out, except in a normal family, the stakes are nowhere near this astronomically high. And the settings aren't nearly as fun. And so it's ultimately just the same dynamics. And so for me, Beatrice, I am an oldest child. Beatrice is always, when people ask me, like, which character do you relate to? I say I relate to all of them, but Beatrice is the one that I think is probably the most similar to me personality-wise, in the sense that we are both, rule followers. We both have striven for parental approval. We're not as spontaneous or daring maybe as our younger siblings, and that's something that I work on. But I think that for me, Beatrice's conflict is kind of just the classic oldest child personality traits, just really writ large. With this, like I said, the stakes. It's like every oldest child thinks that they have some sense of responsibility toward their parents, and I think this is just a so much more massive way of showing that. Is like, and such an interesting conflict of not only is this my father, but this is also my boss, or not only is this my daughter, but this is my successor. The Crown did a good job of playing this out between the Queen and her father, and then also now between the Queen and Charles. And like I said, I think it's so fascinating. I think that royalty is also one of the last ways that we can write a story that deals with fate. That's like fate for so many millennia of storytelling. Fate was this big driving force of, you look at books from even up to like Dickensian novels, and it's like, oh, we could never be together because you're rich and I'm poor, and we're just like fated by our lives. And obviously modern literature can't, that just doesn't, I mean, that conflict plays out to some degree in a lot of romances, but it's not the same. Like we aren't born into social strata and the same, like people can make themselves into who they want to be in the modern world, which is the best thing about the modern world. But you do lose this story engine as a storyteller of like, I'm fated to do this and I didn't choose this destiny for myself. And it's just funny to think about that monarchs are pretty much the last people left on earth who are fated to do something, who have a job that is chosen for them, who don't get to decide who they want to be. And like, we never talk about this because no one ever feels sorry for them. Like, oh, boo-hoo, Prince William has to live in a palace and like gets to be king someday. But there there is an aspect of like, he can't go be anything else. He can't go be a doctor or whatever, like whatever dreams he may secretly harbor, he has to just keep to himself. He has to go do this. And so I love exploring that through Beatrice and sort of seeing that she, there are all these avenues in life that are not open to her, and she just has to come to terms with that and really focus on being good at the one avenue that she does have.
Absolutely. And I am also an oldest sibling and can very much relate. So sometimes I think my younger sister behaves a little more like an oldest sibling because she definitely is the one who very responsibility all the time, doing the right thing.
Oh, that's so rare. See, my sister is very like Samantha. I mean, she's not as flighty as Samantha, but she's the one who wears her heart on her sleeve. She's the one who just does everything so openly and makes herself very vulnerable emotionally. And I'm more closed off. I don't I fell in love one time and we're married, right? And she's fallen in love a lot of times. So
Yeah, we were trying to figure out when we read it together. We were like, I don't know, like, are you more Beatrice? Am I more Samantha? And we always land with, I don't know, we're both, and we'll, it's all good.
yeah.
But back to Prince William. Would you call yourself a royalist, and did you watch any of the Jubilee celebrations this past weekend?
I didn't watch anything really live. I watched clips later. I mean, it was fun that the Jubilee lined up with my book tour, but I was busy. I was very thrilled that one of my good friends in Houston had a Jubilee party over the weekend. So I came home right in time for her Jubilee party, but it was really just a champagne garden party. But that should show you that my friends are very similar to me, and that we all watch The Crown and watch Bridgerton and like text each other about these things. And we're all, I guess you would say we're all royalists. I love the Queen. I love the Queen so much. I think she's she's so incredible. The things that she's lived through and the things that she's done. Am I a supporter of monarchy in theory? I mean, I'll tell you, I'm a supporter of like the UK having a monarchy that I can read about. Like, would I actually want us to have an American monarchy? I don't really think so, but I think it's fun to imagine in fiction. And like I said, I think I can't remember who it was, Tina Brown or somebody in one of their books was like, the Windsors are the world's greatest soap opera and longest running soap opera. And I think that's, they would probably be appalled to hear me say that I love them for entertainment value, but I think, and the fashions and they do important work for all their causes. And obviously, like, that goes without saying, but I think just as an outsider and as an American, like, that you don't have to be governed by them. Our taxes don't go towards their lifestyle. So it's very easy for us to just consume their lives and the things they wear and the things they do as if it's like a great TV show.
Sorry, I was just looking at some of the questions that have come in. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I always, I like to read, the interviews and see Prince Louis making all of his funny faces and stuff, but it's like,
he's adorable.
He's adorable. And I think like he embodies it. The entertainment. They're there for,
I can't wait till Charlotte is 14.
I know.
She's going to be a fashion icon. I feel like she's going to be a firecracker. She's going to get into some trouble. It's going to be great.
Oh, I hope so. I feel like the family has been lacking for like princesses behaving badly level, kind of fun. Yeah. So this is just a couple of random quick questions. Do you think that America has an unofficial royal family? I know a lot of people talk about the Kennedys or the Kardashians, but
I was going to say I get about half Kennedys and half Kardashians on this. I don't, and then occasionally, some of the other political families, the Bushes. I don't think so necessarily, but I think it is very telling that we like to use the term royalty to describe people who wield a lot of cultural influence. So, I mean, I've even gotten a lot of people have read the books and been like, I vote for Beyonce as queen, right? I mean, it's just anyone who you look up to for whatever reason, like we use the term like, yas queen, like and so I think it's just interesting that I don't think the British people do that the same way. Like they don't, maybe they do. I don't have that many British friends, but the ones, and I don't see them often, but the ones that I do have, I haven't really heard them talk about monarchy in that way. And so I think it's interesting that we love to bestow that title upon people very freely, again, because it, I wouldn't say it means less to us, but it's like we don't have a queen, so we just, we can like make anyone our queen.
Which I think is brilliant. Next random question. I loved seeing the handbags and the cookies for your book tour. And I was curious if you had a favorite piece of book-related merchandise or fan art that you've seen made across the series.
Oh, that's amazing. I've seen some fan art. This series has generated less fan art than like the high fantasy series, which is not surprising. But I've seen some really cute like candles and things and bookmarks. So I don't know. I've loved all of it. The cookies that we made for, I'll post one on my Instagram story later. The cookies that I had a local Houston cookie store make cookies for an event that I did last Friday. And I basically just showed them a picture of the cover and they recreated the two tiaras. So they did like Louise's tiara and Beatrice's, and it was really cute to have the cookies side by side. Those were a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm always like impressed by the creativity of people who think of these things, and including my cover designer, who's insanely talented.
I love all the covers. I mean, they look beautiful on the shelf. They go so well together. I mean, they make me look better just sitting here next to them. So
they really do. They're very like grabby covers, if I can use that term. You know what I mean? Like you want to pick them up.
Absolutely. Okay, so we do have some audience questions. So I'm going to ask my last one, which is, what are you reading right now?
Well, I'm a couple different things. So I'm one of those people who I've got books going in all venues. I'm in hardcover. I'm still reading the Princess Diana book by Tina Brown. I shockingly had never actually read it, and I read a lot of royal fiction. And so now that she had the Palace Papers coming out, I was like, I have to read the Diana book. So I'm most way through that. I absolutely love it. It's so witty. It's so much fun. That's definitely my royal recommendation. On audiobook, I just finished Janelle Brown's I'll Be You. I don't usually listen to a ton of thrillers. Have you read this one?
I haven't. This is just my royalty shelf right here with all my Diana books.
Oh, I love it. Yes, I know. And I don't have that book. My book's upstairs by my bed, or I would have grabbed it. But I'll Be You is really, really fun. It's definitely a sort of a thriller, a twisty domestic suspense about two siblings who kind of are like the fake Olsen twins. Like they were child stars, and now one of them has like struggled with her acting career and is kind of in a tough spot, and the other goes missing basically. And so the first twin has to go find her lost twin, and it's really got a lot of twists and turns, and it's fun. Her other book, Pretty Things, came out a few years ago. I really liked that one. And then on ebook, I just finished Book Lovers, and I really enjoyed it. Emily Henry, like her writing always delights.
That's definitely, I haven't looked at the latest numbers, but I think that was one of the largest initial orders I ever placed was for Book Lovers.
Oh, yes.
Like just how many copies I was like, well, they're just going to sell. Don't need to even ask questions. Like they're just going to sell.
Yes. I mean, all the things about publishing in it, like it's a lot of fun.
It is. Okay. So first we have Kim Largest says, hi, Katharine. Natalie Funko says, how are you going to use Wawa when we as Texans have the greatest gas stations on earth?
Oh, Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's?
Yeah.
Buc-ee's.
I totally agree. Buc-ee's is great. I can't deny that Buc-ee's I don't know where I would be in life without Buc-ee's. They are the best gas stations on earth.
Okay. It was like we have ignited the gas station war amongst the country. Which is always fun to see show up on Reddit occasionally too. Kim also says you should put a family tree on your website with all the old kings. So that could be fun.
I have a family tree of I can find it's in the paperback of just the current generation, but I haven't sketched one that goes all the way back.
Next question, and this is a really good one. How many books will be in the American Royals series?
So right now it ends at book 4. So that's part of why book 4 has proven so difficult for me. The story, and if you follow me on social media, you know most of this, but the books were originally acquired in a 2-book deal. So it was American Royals and Majesty, which is why I was able to end the first book the way that I did, with a massive cliffhanger, because I knew that a second book was coming. So my editor, I love my editor, Caroline. She and I work together so well. And pretty early on in Majesty, she told me that she would like to buy a third book, but she wasn't sure when she would get approval for that from the publisher, because it's just not up to just me and Caroline. And so we made this sort of tricky decision to wrap up Majesty mostly, but leave it kind of open-ended. So I can say this all now. I could not say this when Majesty launched, and I still didn't know if there would be a third book, but the ending of Majesty was not what I would have considered endgame for any of my characters. And it was definitely a gamble of me. I could have just wrapped it up and moved on. But since I knew Caroline really wanted to do a third book, and I knew that I did, and so I felt like there was a pretty distinct chance that it would happen at some point. So I had to, like, as I said, walk this very ambiguous line where it was somewhat, there was closure, but it wasn't complete closure. And it's so funny because I felt like the book ended on like a nice, quiet, everyone's story's mostly wrapped up. And then there's still so many readers who are like, what a cliffhanger. And I was like, okay, that's not a cliffhanger. The cliffhanger is like when somebody just died and you don't know like what's going to happen next. But okay, but I hear you in that it's not resolved. And so, these books, I mean, you sell books for a living. Like this business is an ecosystem, and I'm not just sitting here alone, just clacking away at my laptop. Like it is so dependent on the readers, and I am so grateful for each and every reader and every person who buys my book or reads it from a library or recommends it to a friend or posts about it. I don't think the readers fully realize how much this data is relevant to the publishers. They will go into meetings armed with like, this is how many Goodreads reviews it got. Sometimes they will literally screenshot or pull quotes from the reviews that are particularly glowing or particularly funny. And so that it is truly because of the readers that we got to continue the series. Majesty had been out for about 1 week, and Caroline was able to go to her big meeting at Random House and bring all of this with her and basically prove that there was enough of an appetite that we should continue the series. So then she came to me, and also you saw William, my almost 2-year-old, made an appearance in the pre-show. And so this was all happening when I in early September, and my due date was September 24th. So I'm 9.5 months pregnant, and Caroline calls me with the good news that Random House would like to do a third book. And then she said, we would probably also like to do a fourth, but I can't commit to it now. So could we do what we did with Majesty and just like wrap it up, but not fully wrap it up? And it was just so hard to do. And so I said, I'm really not interested in doing that again. And I said, either let's just commit to one book and call it a day, and I'll wrap everything up in book 3, or let's commit to 2 books now. And then I can really go full steam ahead on a cliffhanger again in book 3. And so she, again, this is like 10 days before I'm having a baby. And she says, do you think you could quickly write an outline for me of book 3? And like, what would happen? How quickly can you get me that? So I did. I threw something together. It was just a couple pages. And here we are. So it actually, shockingly, a lot of the middle of the story changed, but the sequence of events that is the final cliffhanger for book 3 is almost identical to what I came up with in that initial document. So I really went for the high drama. I mean, you've read it, you saw. So it's for those who haven't read it, I am sorry. It is a very high stakes cliffhanger. I would say it might even be more cliffhangery than the end of book 1. I think it's really a big cliffhanger. And so, but to keep people from being super outraged, I did ask that we include a proof that there would be a 4th book at the end of book 3. So now you can see it's in writing, it's real, it is coming, and I'm working on it now. As I said, it's been a hard one. Conclusions are always really hard, and I want to make sure that everybody who's appeared in the series kind of gets the ending that they need. And so it's been slow going. I'm also, have a toddler, and I'm trying to renovate a house. Things are busy. We're not in the pandemic anymore. It's like weirdly harder to write because we're back to busy life. So we'll see, but it is coming. It is slowly but surely coming.
Oh, very exciting. So everyone, either read it right now because you can't wait, or pace yourself until you have the release date for the fourth one. So that
I know.
if you're like me and you need to go immediately, I waited to read book 1 until book 2 was like imminently on the horizon because
That's fair. I also do that with series frequently. So I understand that impulse.
Natalie wants to know, would you say there are ill-fated stars for your characters?
I mean, we're back to fate. I don't think fate really exists except for Beatrice, I would say. But I do know what you mean in the sense that I think that the setup of different characters' backgrounds can lead to a lot of obstacles. So the top of mind pairing for me when you asked that question was Nina and Jeff. And can they make it, or are they, are they ill-fated stars? Like, can they ever find a way to get past their core issue, which is that Nina really doesn't want to live in the spotlight. Like, she wouldn't be happy living Kate Middleton's life, but she's in love with a prince. And so what does it mean to be in love with a guy for who he is, but you can't set aside the role that he does? I think it's a concept that other romances have grappled with many a time, but I think it becomes particularly sharp, when there are tiaras and thrones involved. And Jeff's story, I love where Jeff's story goes in book 3. And I don't want to spoil anything, but like where Jeff's story ends in book 3 is, I think, particularly shocking. I don't think anyone will have seen that coming.
So kind of going along with the romance, and she has a follow-up question of, can a good romance exist where they don't end up together?
Ooh. Not in my
good question.
I like a happy ending. Have you read my books? I want everybody to be happy. I want people to leave my books happier than when they came to them. So I know I feel like it's very hard for me to not give every single romantic pairing a happy ending. And I think I have to fight myself to think, okay, some character, everyone gets the ending they deserve. So some characters, like maybe it's just better if they end the series in like a more ambiguous place, or if they end more alone. That's all I can say on that. But yes, I think in my books, at least, if I believe that they're the true romantic pairing and they're the right romance, then I think you can mostly rest assured they will find, not without some obstacles, but they will probably find their way to each other.
I feel like you can just sense each upcoming question, because the next one is do you have any plans for a redemption arc for Daphne?
Read book 3. I can't say anything.
It was just like, oh goodness, it's like you're reading them ahead of time. And then I guess last one will kind of tie them together. How did your writing style develop, and do you have any tips for writing a first draft?
I'm so glad that you asked for tips for writing a first draft, because I think that is the hardest part of the whole process. And I always tell people that. I give the advice I give to writers is, it sounds so obvious, but to, first of all, to keep reading, to read heavily and to read widely. I think it's very easy, and I'm extremely guilty of this, to just continually read what within your comfort zone. And like, I would read royal romances all day, every day, if I didn't force myself to branch out occasionally. But I think it's really important to read things that are totally unfamiliar to you, whether it's a horror novel or like read an old Shakespearean play, or something from like your college days, anything where the voice is very different from what you read normally, that will help your own voice to stay sharp. I think though, if you read too much of the same type of thing, you can be in an echo chamber, and you can start to just sound like the authors that you're reading. I think it's important to kind of keep pushing your own voice. And then keep writing. And people say this all the time, but like the longer that you go without writing, the harder it is to go back in. It's like exercise in that way. And I find that, I don't work on the weekends anymore. I really used to, up until I had a baby, and it's just too hard. Occasionally I can get like an hour or two when he's napping, and if I can, I try. But if not, I really try to think about my books a little bit over the weekend. just because I think that if you fully set it aside and come back to it, there's just sort of this like slow cranking up the gears. It takes longer. And so even if you can write for 10 minutes in a day, like write a diary entry. I'm also really bad. I've tried to journal like at least once every 2 years. I like buy a new journal and try to journal and I can't. But I find that even if I just dip into my story and write a few sentences, I feel better. I feel like I'm more in the zone the next day. So, and then as far as the first draft goes, just it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that perfection is the enemy of completion. That saying is totally true. And part of, we didn't talk about this at all today, but I did used to work in book publishing for 4 years. I worked as an editorial assistant. And I think for me, that was in some ways the best training I could have ever gotten for being a writer myself, because I got to see first drafts and I got to see how much changed between a first draft and a final draft. And it can be so daunting to read a final book and think, how can I ever write something like this? And you have to remember that this is the product of a year's work and many smart people whose brains helped me along the way. It is, it was not done alone. And the first draft was done alone. And the first draft was significantly less good and less polished. And the story went rambling in various places that I cut. And so, you have to remember that you just to get a draft on paper is such an accomplishment and such an achievement. And I think it's worth sticking with it and just continuing to write as hard as that is, instead of, I know people who've been, writing a book for several years, but they've just been basically revising Act 1 over and over. And it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to fall into that trap and just say, I want to fix this thing in Act 1 and fix this other thing. But like Act 1, for me, Act 1 is easy. It's like if the book is a hamburger, the 2 pieces of bread on the ends are the easiest. Like Act 1 is so easy, and the final sequence of events is so easy, and everything else is pretty hard. And I do what we call like a traditional 3-act story structure. That's actually a very screenplay writing method, where so I call it Act 1, and then most of the book is Act 2, and then Act 3 I call the wrap up. And then there are various other terms for things that happen in Act 2, but I always talk about the Act 2 slump, which is like from 30% of the book through 70% of the book. It's the meat of the book, and it's a slump. It's really hard to get through the Act 2 slump for me. And I'm in the Act 2 slump right now. And it's like, my friends know this term. My husband knows this term. I'll come home and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't get past this chapter. And he's like, man, I can't wait till you're through the Act 2 slump. It's going to be so smooth sailing from there. But it's really hard. And so I think if you can just push through that, and then you have a finished draft, you have something you can edit, it's so much easier on the other side of a draft.
So I'll ask one more question from me while I make the call for any final questions from the audience. Put them in now. Do you write sequentially? Do you write everything in the order that it happens, or do you jump around sometimes to the things that you're most excited for?
I almost always write sequentially. I have a few exceptions to this rule, which is, if you remember, there are various scenes where I have one character who effectively has a continuous scene across 2 chapters, and it's cut in the middle with another scene. So, for instance, Beatrice with Teddy at Walthorpe in Majesty was 2 chapters, and there was, I think, a Samantha chapter in the middle. But like I wrote those 2 sequentially because the action was just flowing together. But otherwise, yeah, I actually really do write in order. That's how my brain works. It's really hard for me to go out of order. Sometimes my editor will ask me to. She'll be like, can you just write the next 3 Sam chapters so I can see how this story plays out? And it like kills me because I'm writing, because I'm referencing things because of the way my outlines work. I'm like, and Sam had seen Nina the day before, but I haven't written the scene from Nina's point of view where they saw each other. So I'm like, I don't even know what that's going to be like. Like, how can I reference it if I haven't written it? So I find it really hard. But as I said, most authors are not like me. I know a lot of people who skip all over the place.
Yeah. I know for myself, I really struggled to write anything, and I just wanted to write like the parts I was most excited for. And then it was once I actually sat down, I was like, no, just write them in order, that I actually felt like I could complete something. So I did
You will
find that
almost certainly move
yeah,
them around. They will not be
yeah,
in that order in the final book, but just to write it exactly, to write it in the order you think it's going now, it
yeah,
helps. It helps me to know, like every day I can sit down and I can look at my outline and say, okay, what do I think is happening next? Here's what it is.
yeah. Okay, so we do have a couple more questions that came in that we'll wrap it up with. Kim wants to know, is there any Royals merch in the works that we might be able to purchase?
Royals merch. I don't have anything like that, although I've gotten a lot of requests for book plates. So right now I've just been doing signed books, but I don't know, maybe someday I'll do some book plates. I don't have anything like that designed yet.
Cool. Do you have a favorite character, and if so, who?
I don't have a favorite character, but I will tell you the character who's easiest to write, and this may surprise you, it's Daphne. Daphne is so easy. I'm always so excited when I get to a Daphne chapter because I'm like, this is going to be like a breath of fresh air. She's just so clear. Her motivations are so clear. Her goals are so clear. Her chapters almost never change from the first draft to the final. They might change a tiny bit, but it's like Sam in particular changes all the time, including like her whole plot will change. I've had books actually, even in book 3, I won't say what it was, but she had an entirely different story for the first draft where she was still actually at the League of Kings with Beatrice, but none of the stuff with Marshall was happening the way that it did in the final draft. And yeah, she's hard to figure out. And so I wrote the whole thing, and then I realized I was like, Sam's story isn't working. And I went back to my whiteboard and I scrapped every single chapter, and I was like, okay, I need 14 new chapters for Sam. What's she going to do? And but with Daphne, you can always count on to just be Daphne. And so I need her. I need her in the draft because I like need chapters that will stay, that I don't have to really edit very much, and that's helpful. I'm not the only author. I've been on tour with other authors who've said variations of the same thing, like, oh, the villains are always the easiest to write. And I'm like, they really kind of are. Like, yeah, you know what they're gonna do and they stick to it.
As soon as you said it, I was like, no, that makes perfect sense. Daphne is like very like, this is what she does. Whereas Sam, every time you're like, how is Sam going to react? What is Sam going to do? I really have no idea where Sam is going to go. And so that makes perfect sense that their chapters would be equally.
She's finding her way. She's confused. Daphne thinks she knows
everything.
Yeah. Knows everything. True.
And last one, going back to the alternate history and the timeline, is there any one thing that you find most interesting that you would love to include but hasn't made its way into the books yet?
I love how many questions we've gotten about the alternate history. I've clearly got to publish something on this.
I was saying, you have 2 history majors sitting here running this event.
Definitely got some history people are in the room. I mean, I feel like there's so many fun things. The story that I would like love to examine in more detail is, Lost Queen Emily, that she was briefly mentioned in book 1. You probably don't remember, but she's like my American version of Lady Jane Grey, but slightly tweaked, where she was supposed to be queen and her evil uncle seized power and no one ever really knows. She's kind of Lady Jane Grey / like the twins, the Plantagenet twins that, mystery boys that may or may not be in the Tower of London. And so it's like no one knows what happened to her. And Beatrice and Teddy debate, where Beatrice is like, she was definitely murdered. And Teddy's like, no, she ran away with a stable hand and like lived an anonymous commoner life. And I feel like it'd be fun to do more with Queen Emily and like go back and write something from her point of view. I also would love to do Revolutionary War of American royals. That would be kind of tricky to figure out. But yeah, I've got lots of funny little tidbits. I'm pulling up my document because I had a really fun one. So in real life, George Washington, I was about to call him George the First. George the First in my books, his nephew, his brother Samuel's son, George, who becomes King George II in the American royals world. In real life, he married Lucy Payne, who is Dolly Madison's sister. That's all real. I didn't make that up. That's all real. So like, I love how the families are tangled even in real life. So yeah, they were sisters, and like one married George Washington's nephew, and the other married James Madison. So they were actually the very first wedding performed at the White House was Lucy. And so yeah, I've had a couple references to like Queen Lucy, and that they never end up like they're. He's kind of too far back in the history. So, but yeah. I always love when like the real history lends itself to my alternate history. It's very fun.
That's awesome. Well, a very big thank you to you, Katharine, and thank you to everyone tuning in. We did get signed copies at the store. I have been home with COVID, so I don't know if they're still there. But be sure to check the links in the description for the video. And Drew is telling me, yes, they still are. We do still have signed copies.
Sorry, like COVID. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I'm on the up and up, just waiting to test negative. But thank you so much for tuning in. Really glad it was virtual for that reason, and for all of the people who were able to tune in who wouldn't be able to otherwise. And thank you to everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for coming.